All right, you ready?
Let's roll. All right. Hello, hello. To those of you joining us now and those of you that will watch later, we are excited to be here with the next episode in our series, um, thinking about how we as parents, caregivers, caring adults can change our mindsets from anxious mindsets to healthier responses. Today, we are going to be zeroing in on trust and trust paired with accountability, and what that looks like in our interactions with our young people. Facilitating the call today will be myself. I am Caleb Collier. I'm director of the Institute for Self-Directed Learning, co-founder of the Forest School and Acton Academy. I have nearly a decade as a middle school educator. Um, love young people, especially that age group. Those are my folks. Father of three. I have a 11-year-old, an 8-year-old, and a 5-year-old. Um, and am living into what it means to parent and to educate in this world. Tyler, you want to educate yourself or introduce yourself to the group?
I'd like to educate myself too,
Educate
actually.
yourself as well.
Sounds good. Hey, y'all, it's great to have you with us today, for those watching now and later. And my name is Tyler Thigpen. I'm based in South Atlanta. I'm father of four, ages 20 to 12, and I've worked in education and in Christian ministry. Actually, I'm an ordained minister. And currently, I'm CEO of the Institute for Self-Directed Learning in the Forest Schools, and I'm academic director at the University of Pennsylvania Graduate School of Education, and really excited about today's topic and going to share towards the end a tool that I think will be helpful for those of us who are unfamiliar with it. And so, with that, Caleb, pass it back to you.
Yeah. So this space for us, just to kind of table set, we're here to learn together. We don't have all the answers, but we're here to discuss and to learn together, connect, and collaborate. And though Tyler and I work in education, this kind of open call, for all of us that work with young people. So this is for parents, for caregivers, for educators, coaches, pastors, mentors, um, any and all. I think we all have a stake, a real stake in the next generation, and so we're gonna learn and grow together. Just to put on your radar some things that are upcoming. We will have the next episode in this series will be in January, the 16th. There, we're gonna focus on the messiness of productivity, embracing the messiness of productive struggle. We also have in the spring a series of in-person educator workshops. So these are geared at educators, focusing in on a few different topics. One is zeroed in on like early childhood education. We're calling it Montessori in Motion. That'll be in January. In March, we will be talking through learning design, and then in April, we'll be zeroing in on authentic assessments. How do we, in this age of AI, how do we authentically assess learning that's happening to ensure that it's deep learning, that it's relevant, that is helping learners get to their own goals and achieve their own, um, you know, their own outcomes that they want for their lives. Also, to put on your calendar, in March, we're still nailing down the date, but we have partnered with the University of Pennsylvania to host a symposium on curiosity and open-mindedness. This will be a collaboration between our institute and University of Pennsylvania Graduate School of Education, um, at an in-person event, and we'll share more details as they become available. But put that on your radar if you're in and around the the Fayetteville area and can come down for a symposium, a workshop. I think it'll be a lot of fun. We'll learn a lot. We're excited. For any and all of those, we'll broadcast those opportunities out on our social media and our email list. But feel free to reach out to me. My email is there on the screen. And if you're interested in any of these, I'll make sure you get the information you need to attend what you want to attend. To zero in here on our goal and our purpose for young people. Our desire is that all of our young people become independent, self-directed learners. Um, this isn't just aspirational. In some ways, it's a response to a need. I think the longer we're in the work, the conversations we're having with our colleagues in higher education, our colleagues in industry, um, we are seeing an epidemic of dependent learners, of people kind of aging out of the school system and entering into the world and not having the tools, the strategies, the mindsets, the resources they need to guide their own work, to guide their own learning, to be self-directed in their lives. So not only do we think self-directed learning is, just aspirational as a way to lead one's life, but we think it's crucial as we raise up this next generation. And we have a stance on how to develop those mindsets, how to become a self-directed learner. We don't think it's the case that some people have it and some people don't, that some people are self-directed and some people aren't, never will be, and require the system to get them where they need to go. And here's the general pathway of how you get there. There's four phases, and we break it down this way. And we've done research on this. This is, not just our ideas, but a research-backed approach. One is grounded in desire, building the foundation where young people have their needs taken care of. Some of those basic level human needs. They feel safe. They feel like they belong. They feel like they can make meaningful contributions. They can show up to a space and actually contribute to it. And the space is more valuable because they're present. They see relevance in what they're doing. They can connect their current work, their current class, their current load to their own interest into what they want to do in the future. And in that, they find motivation. They're motivated to see it done. So there's a desire there. Before you actually learn, you have to want to learn. You got to want to do the thing. The second phase is kind of trying on mindsets, right? You start kind of practicing some habits, practice good habits. You start doing harder things instead of easier things. You start seeing your own agency in it, seeing that you have resources at your disposal. There are people that can help you. There are tools that can help you. There are things you can go to meet your needs. So you start practicing those. You're not living into them yet, but you're practicing them. Phase three is where you start to build strategies to meet those mindsets, right? You start to identify what you need to do, what tasks you need to complete, what problems you need to solve, and then you put plans to those to solve the problem, to complete the task. You make a plan that has goals tied to it. You start to figure out how to evaluate your progress. You gain practice and guidance in how to revise your plans according to your progress, when to pivot, when to set different goals, when to practice different habits to meet your goals. You experiment, you learn. The initiative is in you as a learner. You're doing these things with the coaching and resources available from the support system, but it's your initiative. But then it gets hard, right? You're doing the things and you're trying the things and you hit brick walls and struggle is real. And the easy thing to do is to bounce, to cop out. But phase four is like the secret sauce. That's where you keep going. That's where you kind of climb out of the pit or over the wall. Um, you see something through all the way through to completion. And even when it's a struggle, you persevere, you persist, you build the habits and the mindsets of doing the hard thing, even when it's challenging, because you see the meaning of it, the relevance of it, and it has, real use to you in your life. So that's our pathway. Before we move forward into like, our topic of trust with accountability, any questions, any comments about that general pathway of becoming self-directed? You can hop off mute. Feel free to bring your question to the group.
Hey guys, just would love to hear a little bit more, as I'm sure you're going to talk about it, on that notion of desire and how traditional school sort of impacts that notion of inherent desire and how without it, the other phases really can't get going. So I'm really curious about that as the sort of unlocking mechanism to moving to phases two, three, and four.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. Glad you're with us too. Thanks for joining. One way I think about it, I spent years in the PhD program studying self-directed learning, but I think the clearest conceptualization I found of self-directed learning is kind of this direction arrow. The traditional system, the direction arrows are coming from outside in, right? It's standards, it's curriculum, it's expectations, it's things that are being forced from the outside into the learner, right? Whether they want to learn them or not, whether they have the desire to learn them or not, those things are there. I think the heart of self-directed learning is the directional arrow shifts, right? So we're starting here and we're going outward, right? The learner sees that their own thoughts, plans, their own interests, their own passions, their own sense of purpose has meaning and value and connection to the things that they want to learn and can be tied to those standards and those there's room there, but it has to start here. So I think for us, in our work, um, a lot of it is on just the social emotional, like, as school leaders, what can we control, and the feelings of safety and belonging, and making sure every one of our learners, feels like they can show up to a space and be themselves and be seen and heard. All of that is crucial and important. And then as education designers, how can we start with the innate curiosity? You know, Aristotle's first premise in the metaphysics is that all men desire to know. All humans are innately curious. They want to know things. They want to make meaning of the world. You don't have to force anyone to want to learn. We come into the world wanting to learn. Um, but slowly, because of those directional arrows, I think traditional systems can tend to beat that curiosity out of us because we see that curiosity doesn't have value in the traditional system. It's not celebrated. In some ways, it's penalized. So I think that's my response. How do you have anything you would add to that?
No, I think that's great. Michelle, it's great to see you here. I saw you come off. Did you have a question or comment?
I do. Hi. It's good to see you too. I think this is interesting. It's always a circle, right? One thing to the next, and it comes back around to desire you do the hard things. I'm an interventionist of early childhood. I find it interesting that often when the kids come to my room, even though they're young and they're quite little, that they've already lost the curiosity that you're speaking of, the desire. And so often we talk about this actually every single day, this circle. They repeat it to me when they leave the room, which is I'm surrounded by love, I can do hard things, and then I'm proud of myself. And we talk about the hard things that actually in my room have to come first. Then they start to realize that they're proud of themselves and, oh, they actually really do like this learning, this feeling, this goal that they achieved. And then I'm able to build the desire for them to try again. So the circle kind of starts in different places, but I do feel like it's sort of a circle, maybe, if that's how I don't know if that's how you
Yeah,
guys see it.
I agree. Yeah, I think the mountain here is, for us, it's a good visual, but I don't think it's actually accurate. And I think it is more circular. I think of a spiral. I think of it. It's like this, right? You're going up. But then you get back to a place. Maybe it's some of this can be by task or domain. Like, as I'm going through math, right? I might have to start this thing over and over. The harder I get into conceptual mathematics. Or I might be very persistent in math, but when it comes to another subject or another skill set, I have to start at that desire, right? I, about a decade ago, we bought a house that needed heavy renovations, and I had to very quickly build a desire to renovate a house, and I had no skill set to do it, and I still don't have very much of a skill set to do it, but we needed a house, so the relevance was there. So I did what I could, but I think there is this cyclical nature to it all. I agree with you. Any other questions, comments, wonderings?
Just listening. This is good though. Working with older students, I should say, that is one of the many gaps, right? Like you said, depending on the domain, so much, so many distractions, and many times I'm in a high school right now doing some intervention work. They're highly stimulated. It's so much going on. They have to kind of get in a space where they can kind of calm themselves, and I always ask questions like, how's your day going? What successes did you have today? Did you have any challenges? Because they're like moving fast. Everything's very quick. Everything has to be done. You have to do this. So I'm finding that overstimulation at times can make that phase one of desire, it's a process, so this is good conversation in the sense that depending on the age group, what the environment of the school is, depending on if they're homeschooled or in a public school, it can vary, but based on that, it's like, okay, you're going to need some time as the facilitator to kind of unlearn, as they say. I learned that from being in some homeschooling groups, to unlearn what many times they're learning their calm space should be, or if they can even have that time to get to that space where they're centered.
That all resonates, Christina.
Hey,
Thanks for sharing.
yeah,
Yeah, I think sometimes, especially in that phase four, that persistence piece, we got to kind of rekindle that desire, right? We kind of have to circle back at times and spark it to move on, come back to that relevance and seeing
exactly.
it.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Anybody else?
One other thing I just would add, Caleb, is like,
Yeah, go ahead,
I
Tim.
love your house example. Like you said, I bought this house and then I had the need to be somebody who like had the desire to learn how to build a house, right? Or like renovate a house, and like that notion of creating the context that generates the need that then generates desire, right? So like the design element in school to create that need and to have that need be authentic and to come from the learner, but how sort of that imperative can often link to audience, real challenge, meaningful work that matters. These things can often create and unlock desire, right? So, and the more that it's abstract, doesn't mean anything to me, I don't have any buy-in in it, all those things, it's harder to get desire when when the need is not present. I guess is what I'm trying to explore a little bit.
Yeah, I think you're right on, Tim. I think need and relevance are, are connected, right? Like if I have a need, there is relevance in solving that need and meeting that need. Um, if I don't have a need, or if I can't see the need, the relevance can be harder to find. Um, I think sometimes when we talk about desire, we talk about things that I like to do or I want to do. Sometimes it's desires like I need to do, right? And so I do think that's important. Cool. Well, that's just some table setting for us as we get started. Tyler, I'll hand it off to you to walk through this next part.
Thanks, Caleb. To bookend that introduction, I think I would just, and what I'm taking away from some of your thoughts and questions, those of you who've joined, is just the sheer sort of amount of work and intentionality it takes just to create the conditions for phase one, for that desire, for that relevance, for that safety and belonging, that we can't take for granted, and it is in fact work. And one of the things that works against that, that pushes against that, that is a threat, is sort of the bigger problem that is really the genesis of this monthly webinar series that Caleb and I decided to do, which is a problem that we're seeing in North America in this day and age. And many of you on this call here, you've worked with in youth development or education or parenting for a long time, and so in some ways, I think you'll be able to relate. But for folks who the years that we've done this work, trying to guide young people on this pathway to become, a truly interdependent, self-directed learner, we've been met with quite a bit of, anxiety, on the part of parents and caregivers. And I think it's just the water in some ways that we swim in. And I'm a person, I'm a pastor minister by training prior to moving into education. And I actually feel like a lot of the work that I end up doing in order to create the conditions for youth development is is really pastoral. with parents and caregivers, especially, and educators as well, because there's fear, there is anxiety, and I can confess that I have been there myself. My children, I've 20 and 18-year-old who give me feedback about how I parent my 14 and 12-year-old. They say, "You've changed, Dad. You've changed how you," and I'm like, "Yeah, I have, and sorry." And thank goodness I have, and I've actually spent some time, confessing to my two older children about some of the ways in which I parented out of anxiety and fear, instead of a more healthy mindset. And I know when I started teaching in Georgia's largest public high school, I taught out of initially there was some fear and anxiety. I was excited and, but some of what underpinned my practice was, one thing was fear of losing my job. I felt like I had to over-explain things to young people so that they could absolutely get it, so they would perform well on a test, and my job would not be threatened. And then, from an anxiety standpoint, I found myself seeking external validation quite a bit from my work. And, I discovered that when I would explain things to young people and I would captivate them and encourage them, and they would be that aha moment that they would have, I found that validated my personhood in a way that was sort of addictive, to be honest with you. It was almost like a dopamine rush. And so I really, my practice early on in youth development and education was was pretty direct, but out of fear and anxiety, to be honest with you. And it's only as I've grown, um, as a man, as a leader, as a head of school and head of an organization, and dealing with my own fears and anxieties as well as those of folks a part of my organization, have I come to really seek out healthier approaches. And when I see, some of the trends happening in our society today, some of the concerning components, are listed here: rising adult anxiety, over control, and some avoidance of risk, pressure from comparing one another socially, kind of to my point earlier, sort of a performance-based self-worth, and a lot of parents and caregivers who are, trying to make ends meet with work and family, some of whom are overwhelmed, you know, and that has an impact. And so, and this is the next slide, some of the routines that we end up embracing that actually work against us, where we sort of get into our own way, are, we can over control and surveillance, taking the form of micromanaging or over scheduling. We can, as parents and caregivers or educators, we can rescue before we should, or over function. We can displace agency by speaking for children, or by maybe preaching something instead of modeling it for them. We can compare, we can pressure young people, and then we can misplace accountability by, instead of looking inward and taking full responsibility, blaming others. And I know that in the work that I do at both of our schools and our institute, I mean, I'm confronted with these sorts of mindsets and these sorts of actions from parents and caregivers and educators on a regular basis, on a regular basis. And so for this webinar, Caleb and I have a theory of change, which is that if caring adults can replace anxious control with shared healthy mindsets and simple routines, then learners will own their goals. They'll be able to persist through struggle, and they'll flourish because homes, classrooms, and teams are really aligning around agency. And so, in what follows, Caleb's going to walk us through an example of a moment that you may be familiar with, and going to invite you to, think about how you would respond, and then we'll sort of talk through that and what are the anxious potential responses, what are healthy responses, where does each set of responses lead us and what's the impact it has on children. And then once we kind of make sense of this scenario together, then I'm going to share a simple routine that I think is very actionable, that is helpful, that we've shared in our communities in the past, that's been well received, to help us as caring adults, professionally and personally, really bring a healthy mindset. And it essentially is trust, with accountability. So with that, Caleb, would love to turn it over for you.
Yeah. So we're gonna, put on our imagination hats for a second and do some role playing. Um, the scenario is you are working with a young person. So maybe it's your own child, maybe it's a student you work with, maybe a mentee. Um, and they are working on math, right? And so they report to you like, hey, I'm done with math for this week. I've done what I'm supposed to do with math. For me, this is real. I have my 11-year-old is homeschooled, and so we talk about math learning a lot. You know, so imagine, for me, my daughter reports to me, hey, done with math for the week. Um, you know, you in whatever kind of role you would serve for this young person, what would you do? Like, what would be your response to a young person kind of self-reporting that they finished a workload? We're gonna put you in breakout groups and just give you some time to discuss it. Like, how would you respond to this? Um, yep, go ahead. You've received some invitations, so jump on in.
Caleb, I've invited you to room one, and I'll go to room two.
All right. Get my screen on. Don't pay attention to the million tabs I have open. That's my Achilles heel as a human. Um, all right. We had some great discussions in my group. I trust that y'all had some good ones too. And we'll kind of circle back and surface some learnings as we talk through this. Um, but as we think through, moving from anxious mindsets to healthier mindsets and reactions, there are a couple of buckets of anxious that I want to, kind of at least bring to our attention. And we kind of mentioned some of these in our call. Um, one is like leaning on the trust, leaning into the trust, but without accountability, right? Saying things like, "Great, that's awesome," but never really checking for evidence. Saying, "Congrats, I trust you." Even if you see signs from your young person that they're kind of avoiding some of the workload, um, listening to our children kind of like vent about their learning or their school environment or their day, and just kind of assuming that that's the version of events, without ever kind of probing deeper, asking questions, accepting the short answers, and never asking deeper questions or looking at evidence and saying, "Hey, can you provide evidence to support what you're saying?" Those are ways that are trust heavy. Those are trust heavy responses, but they're lacking accountability. And we'll look at in a minute at kind of what some outflows of that are. The second bucket, kind of anxious mindsets, are hovering and controlling. This is like the accountability without the trust. This is like you're standing over their shoulder, you're watching them do problems. You're kind of leading with words where um, you're demeaning their responsibility. Like you're communicating to them either explicitly or implicitly that they're not responsible, that they need you to step in and organize to make sure they're doing their work, to make sure that they're on track. Um, you interrogate them. What'd you do? What'd you learn? Why don't you ever tell me anything? Right? And those the scene is kind of like out of those crime TV shows where it's like the hanging light bulb, and the power dynamic at play there isn't one that's going to build trust. But what does it build? There's some whys behind this that are motivated um, for pretty like for good reasons. That we do things, even our reactions are motivated and have reasons for them. For the trust without accountability, sometimes, checking just feels intrusive or it's time consuming. We're busy. Um, or, that we feel like we might communicate mistrust. We want to, preserve harmony. We want to avoid conflict, especially after a long day of work. Um, another why is that we hope that this trust alone will build responsibility. Young people will see the trust, feel the trust, and they'll lean into they'll just be like, oh, my parents trust me, I'll be responsible. We fear that any kind of pressing for evidence will trigger resistance or emotional pushback. And we want to show support. We want to show that we believe our young people, believe our child. We might want to avoid the discomfort of discovering there might be a more complicated reality underneath it all. We might have to have some real hard conversations about the process of trust. And we're tired. We don't want to be overbearing, and we have this fear that if we push in and ask for evidence or signal that we have a lack of trust, that there will be a shutdown or frustration or conflict that will require more energy, more time from us, and we feel like we might have to give. On the other bucket, the hover and control, we take on a lot of anxieties. We're trying to shield our child. We're worried about them falling behind and us falling behind. We're worried they're not doing enough, we're not doing enough. We fear the meltdowns, we fear the conflict, the failure, or the embarrassment that we're trying to shield them from, the the consequences of falling behind or failure. And we see ourselves as the shield to absorb that stress ourselves, protect our young people from feeling it. We fear judgment. We want our child to feel defended. We are quick to step in and restore calm if our kids are anxious. And we crave reassurance. You know, we're afraid the silence means something is wrong. We want connection. So there are motivating reasons behind both of these reactions. But here's what they result in. The first, the trust without accountability. Um, our young people learn to perform. They do things to complete things, rather than to really own them themselves. If no one's asking me for evidence or to see like what my progress is, I don't have to share it. I can just do the bare minimum and get by. Um, it reinforces my own or the young people's avoidance, right? And honesty becomes optional. If no one checks, it's easier to do the bare minimum, or quietly not do the work at all. Young people don't grow in their sense of self-awareness. It stays shallow. If they're rarely prompted to notice their own gaps, their own choices, and or next steps, and reflect on them, they're not going to grow in those things. Those things are going to stay weak spots for them. And the gaps will widen. Their skills gap, their resilience gaps will widen, so that bigger struggles later on will be even bigger than they need to be, and scarier later. Um, and over time, our children become more dependent on us instead of independent. So those are the results of the mindset of trusting without accountability. The results of the helicoptering, the hover and control. Um, there's some similarities here. Children are becoming more dependent and less resilient over time because the adults are stepping in to shield them from stress or carrying it for them. They learn that emotions must be avoided or managed by adults. Um, and in avoiding those emotions, avoiding those stressors, they don't build the skills they need for handling conflict or failure or embarrassment themselves. Uh, they get taught through this process that someone will carry that load for them, handle that load for them, and so they don't build the skills they need to do it. Honesty shrinks, the communication shrinks. Kids will share less, tell partial truths, or shut down, because they don't want to make parents anxious. They don't want to make educators anxious, and so they'll tend towards quick reassurance rather than telling hard truths, and that creates fragile relationships. Relationships become performance based with connection tied. to calm and success rather than being a safe place to bring hard things. So what's actually true? Children thrive when expectations are clear, support is warm, and looking at evidence is a normal part of the relationship, not a judgment. Someone told me recently that um, clear is kind, right? So when expectations are clear, there's a kindness there, and we can show up as warm supports, and we build in a habit and a routine of, okay, what are we working on? How do we know what we're doing? How we're learning? And it's just part of it. It's not a judgment or a signal of distrust. That's just a healthy engagement. Um, Procrastination is not a character flaw. It's a skill gap and a pattern that we can actually get better at with practice and sharing accountability and having accountability structures that are habitually in place. Kids communicate more when we as adults create low pressure, curious, predictable touch points, becoming that safe harbor, being a space where kids are able to talk about, both celebrate what they're learning and talk about the things that are hard, the struggles that are there, where they feel like they are truly progressing, where they feel like they might need help. And capability then grows, as we as adults hand over real responsibility to young people instead of always holding it ourselves. I'm scared of letting that go, afraid kids can't handle it, or believing that they can't, that they need us to shoulder their stress and anxiety. Um, Struggle is useful information. And, when our kids are struggling, the signals that they give us it's helpful information for us to have. It's not a danger. And if we can create calm supports, kids learn to face challenge instead of fear it. So we looked at some of the anxious mindsets and responses. Here are some healthier responses. Trust with accountability. So back to the scenario, young person in your life says, "Hey, I finished my work." Here's some responses of ways of showing that you trust them, but also holding them on the hook for their accountability. Great. Show me your best problem from this week. All of these are going to center in like agency for the young person. So see how like, hey, I'm excited for you. Bring something to me to show me. Like, what's the thing you're most proud of? Bring me your best problem from the week. Um, uh, an invitation. Walk me through one thing you found challenging and how you handled it. Right? What's one problem, one struggle, one thing that was hard for you, and how did you respond to that? That gives us a lot of insight into our kids, not just like their math skills in this example, but it's how they approach challenge in general. Let's look at whether you met your goals, and what's one thing you can do today to keep on track with your goals, and when should we check in again? Again, putting that agency back in the hands of young people, letting them know that we will check in. That'll be part of what we do, but you can help control the cadence of that. Thanks for the update. Walk me through what you worked on, what evidence you can share, then we'll make a plan. Tell me your plan, and I'll repeat it back to you so that we're aligned. Right? The plan is theirs, but we're invited into it. For alignment. Showing that we hear them. I hear you. Show me what you tried so far. Moving forward, which part of this do you want support with? Which part can you handle? Right? Inviting them to let us know their struggles and their needs, how we can help, ways that we, can be supports to them. But then also celebrating the things that they feel they can do themselves. Maria Montessori famously said, never do something for a child they can do themselves. So invite them to say, like, hey, what can you do? What can you handle for yourself? And here are the mindsets that kind of undergird those responses. Curiosity over control. So leading with questions, inviting young people to do the thinking. We call this the Socratic method. Socrates, if you read any of Plato's dialogues, just lead with questions, right? He would ask tons of questions, but in that, so much learning and growth is surfaced. And even when it gets complicated, it creates kind of generative conversations. Read behavior generously. So see these signals as information, not defiance. The signals of struggle or procrastination. Our young people are telling us things. What are they telling us, and how can we generously read those behaviors, create safe harbors, um, making home and school as best we can a steady place, to be honest with each other, to reset, um, to be, kind of clear and open, and then leaning on this trust with accountability, offering warmth and belief, combined with clear goals and follow through. All right, so far, what do you like, wish, and wonder about any of what we talked through? Feel free to hop off, mute, and let your voice be heard. Cool, cool, cool. Feel free to drop in the chat too if you're not able to be in a place where you can speak. Happy to engage there. All right, with those mindsets in mind, I think Tyler has a tool he's going to unpack for us.
Yeah, I would love to wrap with a tool that we hope is helpful for caring adults who are parenting, educating, working in youth development, and to invite you into the headspace and heart space. I want to invite you to think of a time recently where you felt anxious. When it can be regarding a parenting or educating or mentoring a young person or just any time of anxiety that you've felt recently, and how did you respond? There's next slide, Caleb. There's a researcher, Richard Schwartz, who in the 1980s, building off a body of knowledge in the field of psychology, developed internal family systems theory. And you may be familiar with internal family systems theory, but Schwartz, the longer that Schwartz would observe, adults in a counseling and therapy context, would just made the observation that, sometimes, and have you ever, said something like, well, part of me wants to do this, but part of me wants to do that. Or if you've ever felt conflicted about something, that you wanted to do in your life. And Schwartz was like, you know what, instead of seeing different parts, first of all, Schwartz said it seems like there's different parts inside of people. And instead of seeing that as a negative, what if we lean into it a little bit? And what if we wonder, hey, what are those different parts? And what questions are they asking? And what are they needing? And so Schwartz identified actually four different parts of ourself. One is in the top left there, an inner child. The second on the top right is a manager. The third on the bottom left is a firefighter, and then the fourth would be a mature self. And the thinking was that each one of these different parts, is asking or is saying different things. So next slide, for example, the inner child in us is typically sort of wounded and harkens back to our childhood, and is crying out for help and attention and comfort and safety. And whatever it is in that anxiety-filled situation, the inner child is really looking for attention to be comforted. The firefighter is just trying to, when there's a feeling of anxiety, or a big emotion, the firefighter's just trying to put it out, just end it immediately, whatever it does, like try and stop this. And then the manager is less reactive and more proactive. The manager is like trying to control and manage the circumstances of their life so that they can avoid ever feeling this anxious, so they can ever avoid feeling afraid or any big emotions. And so they're trying to control things. And then the self is the more mature person who takes into account, what the inner child is saying and needs, what the firefighter is saying and is tempted to do, what the manager is saying and is tempted to do. And the self, the mature self, makes a compassionate, wise, and more balanced decision for how to respond and how to react. So, for example, an example in my own life. Next slide. Once recently, I was yelled at and I was accused, and I felt anxious. And I think if in my own reflection, the inner child in me was saying, "Hey, protect me." This is a dangerous situation. The firefighter in me was like, "Hey, calm this person down right now." The manager in me was like, "Okay, hey, I need to avoid this person, for the future, for the foreseeable future." And the mature person, after taking into account, all of these possible responses, really leaned in this instance, and I can see other possible responses, but in this instance, give it time, seek to understand the facts, then make a judgment and take action. If we apply this tool, this internal family systems theory, to this question of math, I finished my math. As an adult, the inner child in me might say, hey, I just want to feel safe and connected to this child, whether it's my child or my student or my mentee. And so I don't want to disrupt that relationship. So I'm gonna try and like be their friend. I'm not gonna do anything that is gonna upset the balance between our relationship, because I just want to be safe and connected with this kid. The firefighter in me, could, if I feel anxious, it could be like, hey, let's check your math right now, or else something might go wrong. Um, or I could just sort of blindly trust and avoid it altogether and say, great, and move on, so as to avoid this feeling of anxiety of like, oh gosh, their math is done, let's move on. The manager in me, if I'm feeling anxious about an individual, a student, finishing their math, I could say, you know what, let's set up a bunch of control systems and let's verify absolutely everything that we possibly can, so that you know so that I, as a manager, can avoid this feeling of anxiety, about math progress for this mentee or student or child. But then the more mature self, could respond, hey, let's trust and just check in together calmly, you know, uh, knowing that that okay, sounds good, and let's make some time to address this. But what about you? You know, uh, when you thought about the thing that caused you anxiety, what was your inner child saying? What was your firefighter part saying? What was your manager part saying? And then what is the sort of mature self, potentially responding? What do y'all think? Is this any questions about this tool, this approach, and what do you think it's helpful? Can you see yourself using this idea? Why or why not? Would love to hear from you.
This is good in the sense that, I mean, I feel these things, it's like de-escalating, if you will. Like when you first feel that sense of the anxiety, the inner child does come out, right? So I'm just speaking for myself, kind of just working with youth and being a parent. Like I mentioned before, the reflection piece is so important because when you have those experiences, you do just immediately, I do immediately respond as an inner child. I may shut down, um, because I don't want any, what's the word, when you don't want any conflict, or I just want everybody to feel comfortable, right? But then you feel the firefighter, you feel all these different emotions in kind of one, within a matter of minutes. Like they can all come to surface, but it's like, okay, what do I feel first, like you said? But coming from maturity, eventually you know what's most important, like what you need, what the time calls for. Sometimes it does call for a firefighter, you know what I mean, because you may need to react so someone's not hurt. You may need to do that. Sometimes, if it's something that you've experienced before, the mature person may show up because now you know, oh, okay, we've been here before. So let me just take some time back and wait to respond, if you will, get my thoughts together. But I guess what I'm trying to say is the more experience you have depends on how you may respond. But yeah, I would definitely use something like this because we all have to learn or unlearn what how we're responding to things. You know
Well,
what I
well,
mean? To situations.
well said, Christina. And in my experience, I mean, I even did this yesterday. I used
Mm,
this approach. It's like it gives you options. You know,
yeah.
so like
Yep.
your point was, hey, the firefighter option might be the right thing in that moment, and so when you
Mhm.
think through the sort of, okay, how might what's the inner child requesting and what might the response be? What's the firefighter requesting and what might the response be? What's the manager requesting? What might the response be? It gives you
Mhm.
options, and it
Yep.
might be one or none of those, that's the right move for us. But I think the thinking and invitation here is to do it with a level of intentionality and care, as we do this
Yeah.
work.
Yeah. Yes, because we're always being intentional, right? I mean, just because if you do the work for so long, you have to be intentional and know who you're dealing with. You have to know your students, you have to know your children, their personalities, because that is part of the intentionality of how you want to approach. But I like that phrase, you have options, you do. And we need options.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Any
I
final
love
thoughts, Michelle or Marta?
I really, my brain is going 1,000 miles a minute trying to think about my own children and my intervention classroom and how this works and all of those things, both from myself as an educator perspective personally, but also from a student perspective. And I know I'm really interested to know in your classroom or in your schools, which are predominantly self-directed, how do you find, new students to your school that aren't used to self-directed learning? Those would be probably most similar to a lot of the students maybe in my situation or in public schools. There's a lot of anxiety from the adult perspective, but what about the student perspective? Do they have some anxiety about being able to do this on their own without, we all have different personalities. God gave us lots of different personalities and ways we like to go about the world and organize ourselves. I'm just really interested in how this plays out in your schools.
Michelle, this is a great question and a great one to end on. And I'll share my thoughts, and Caleb, invite you to conclude us. But Michelle, as you were talking, I think we've seen the gamut of student responses when they join us. So one of the things I really like about the framing here of trust with accountability is the spectrum. Um, the on one side of the spectrum, you've just got uh, you've got total trust. It's sort of avoidant. It's just like go forward. So I think we see some students come into our environment, and when they're given control of their learning, they take off and go. And they're like, thank goodness I have control now. That's safe. I'm going to go. And they go fast. And I think the threat there is actually that they don't slow down and stop and pay attention to their purpose, pay attention to their calling, and make sure that what they're doing, they actually know a why. So it's not an anxious thriving, in a self-directed learning environment. And it's actually a very grounded, purposeful, approach. And so I think the approach with that category of child looks different. Now, I will say that's the minority of kids. That's not the majority. The majority of kids, I think, do the opposite. They're more avoidant, uh, and they will say, "Oh, nobody's telling me what to do, and I'm gonna do whatever I'm gonna want to do, and I'm gonna choose to do easy things, not hard things." And so actually, they make poor choices that don't necessarily advance or progress their learning. And we have built into our school systems a series of systems and processes whereby learners experience the natural consequences of their choices over time, and they learn from experiencing the natural consequences. And at some point in our environments, there's usually sort of an aha moment, formal or informal, where they shoulder the responsibility of their learning in a way that's next level, and they take that responsibility and they sort of start playing advanced player mode, and it becomes much more purposeful, much more agentic, much more learner driven, much more learner led. Um, and so I think that's the other side of the of the coin. So it's not necessarily anxious; it's more avoidant, for a while. But then there's sort of a you know a right sizing that and a growth and development that happens. And I think what one of the things that's so crucial for us as caring adults and guides in that scenario and in either journey is dedicated time for reflection and connection. Dedicated time to help the learners, think about their own thinking, to look inward, to identify their feelings, thoughts, plans, to even do exercises like this, to think about their goals and their connectivity to their life, and to do that in the context of a caring community, where we're supporting one another. I think if those things are in place, the growth, and agency and development that happens is really phenomenal. Caleb, what would you add, subtract, or change before as we wrap things up here?
Yeah, no, that all resonates. I think what came up for me was that kind of last point you made was, we explicitly bake this into our model where our learners are doing lots of identity work. They're doing lots of that inward reflecting work, figuring out who they are, how they respond, how they lean into anxiety or not, how they can practice growth mindset. We walk them through that, pathway of self-directed learning we started with. We help them self-identify where they are. So it's all, I think that's a key part is the metacognition and the reflection and just understanding who I am as a human. How do I show up in a space? How do I work? And giving them tools to think about it. Something I want to close with is, just a sponsor for these webinars is Match Grant. If you are a nonprofit or you work in a nonprofit space and you're looking for tools to help you find grants, reach out to us and we can talk to you more about Match Grant. It's a super awesome tool that uses AI resources to comb through grant databases and surface things that are helpful to you and your program. But thank you all for joining us this afternoon. Our next one of these will be in January. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out. Uh, thank you for joining us for your lunch hour. And we're excited that you took the time.
Thank you all very much.
Thanks, Tyler. It was really good to see you.
Michelle, you too.
Yeah.
I'm going to pause the recording.